This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson. Hello, yes, this is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks, events, happenings in the world of politics, science, technology, entertainment, everything that affects us, everything we interact with during our week, and we take a look at it from a higher perspective. By a higher perspective, of course, I'm talking about from a spiritual perspective, or you might also use the term metaphysical perspective. The point of view that says that we are creating all of these stories in our world to tell us something about ourselves and to give us a platform to explore feelings, thoughts, ideas that are not really who we are or the truth of who and what we are, but allow us to sort of role play in a way these ideas of fear, these ideas of lack, these ideas of greatness or of power, all of these ideas that have really no meaning in the truth of who and what we really are, but are things that we explore, play with by creating these sorts of, I refer to them as sort of holograms, where they are very, very detailed, very convincing, very realistic seeming illusions that you get swept up in, that you get caught up in. And we do it, as I mentioned before, to have these experiences and ultimately to lead us back to the truth of who and what we really are. And that's why it's so important to look at these things in this way, to go into these stories, to go into these situations that might at first be off-putting, might be button-pushing in a way, and to take the energy back from them so that you can realize what it is that, it's really telling you about who and what we are. And then once that energy is taken, it ceases to have such a dire or seemingly powerful influence on you. And you can, go about your evolving, without getting tripped up in illusion. Illusions are here; they're important. We create them. We create them for a reason. When I say illusions, unlike many other people who talk about many other spiritual or self-help people who talk about the illusions of the world, I'm not doing so in a negative fashion or a way to denigrate that or to say, to kind of value judge that. That's not what I mean to do. I'm just giving you the perspective, the understanding that, these are illusions. They aren't the be-all and end-all. They aren't the truth of who and what we are. And realizing that, recognizing that gives us empowerment. And empowerment is what we need. Empowerment is what, wellness is all about. And so there you have the wellness portion of our Spirit and Wellness Show. So today we're going to be talking about, once again, we're talking about the transition era. And I'll explain that in a moment. If you haven't tuned in before and don't know what that means, I'll explain what I mean by that. But we're going to be talking about the role that science and spirituality are taking and will be taking in the transition era. And of course, it's Valentine's Day, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And since Valentine's Day has a lot to do with hearts, we're also going to be talking about ways to keep your heart healthy. both emotionally and physically. So we're going to talk about those things. But first, let me explain transition era, what that means. So we recently, and this is, I'm going to use terms from astrology that you may or may not be familiar with, or you may or may not believe in, but bear with me. I just use them as a way to illustrate sort of forces that are at play in our world. And I feel like astrology does that very well. If you don't believe in it, that's fine. I mean, I think that you can still get the idea of what I'm talking about. So during the years from 2012 to 2015, astrologers basically noticed that there was uh, a repeating pattern of two planets interacting with one another, and those two planets were Uranus and Pluto. Now I know Pluto's been downgraded uh, from being a planet by scientists, but as far as astrologers are concerned, it's still a planet and still a very powerful one too. So what the interplay between those two planets really was about. Uranus represents, in astrological terms, Uranus represents the creative impulse, the independent and revolutionary impulse, the embrace of freedom and inventiveness, uh, the independent spirit, if you will, and the desire to be free and to be allowed to be who and what you are. Pluto represents, well, quite a number of things. Oppression, in one way or another. Uh, Pluto can also represent obsession and complete control, desire for complete control. And on its darker edge, it has to do with manipulation um, and fear impulses and death and rebirth. It's kind of a scary planet in lots of ways, but it's also a transformative planet, as is Uranus. So when they work together, as they did during the 60s and 70s, you had a lot of transformative moments in our world where social causes moved forward, uh, and new forms of technology were born that are still very much evolving and important in our world today. Uh, New forms of healthcare, of medicine, also were uh, developed during that period and continue to have an influence on our culture. So that's what those two planets can do when they cooperate. In this instance, they are not cooperating. Or during those years between 2012 and 2015, they were not cooperating. They were, in fact, at odds with one another. And this has created the seeds of social change and revolution, but not in a straightforward manner, unfortunately, because you have Uranus representing the forward thinking, the desire to move forward with revolutionary ideas, and then you have Pluto pulling back against that. Uh, Pluto representing the forces that would wish to tamp that down, to keep that from happening, to keep control of things. So this is a period where we saw the Arab Spring happen, and we saw revolution happen, and then kind of get pulled back away. So it's sort of two steps forward, one step back kind of change. And in some instances, we've seen change that had been long delayed make rapid progress, such as ideas about gay marriage and some of more more social justice uh, portions of our world, such as the influence of of police authority, uh, and the abuse of that authority in many cities and towns regarding African Americans and other minorities. So you have things like the Black Lives Matter movement coming up, and also a great deal of emphasis, as we've seen now, which is really taking its biggest solidification through uh, the campaign of Bernie Sanders, the complete awareness now of income inequality and what that means and how it's affecting so many people. And of course, then there's the pullback on that as well. So, unfortunately, well, I won't say unfortunately, just in the case of what's going on now, you have the seeds for amazing changes that are going to happen. And I believe they are going to happen. However, because you've had this interplay between those two planets, it's going to be a push-pull kind of thing. And that push-pull kind of thing, while it can be frustrating, is also a way of refining these changes so that when they finally do happen, they happen for good. They don't become, momentary blips, but the progress is made and can't be taken back. So that's the process we're in, and I call this era that we're in, since those transits of those two planets, I call this the transition era because I believe we are transitioning into an era where these new ideas, these revolutionary ideas, are going to blossom. And we've talked about last week. We talked about the economy and how that is changing, and how the ideas about the economy are changing. Again, you can listen to Bernie Sanders talk about things like that, and we also have heard quite a bit about negative interest rates and what that does. And I talked about that last week. So the subject we're going to talk about as far as transition era activities is science and spirituality. So science and spirituality at this point in time have been more at odds than ever before. And the reason that they are at odds, or seemingly at odds, is because people don't understand either. There's a great deal of misunderstanding on both ends of the spectrum, if you will. And I'm going to talk about how science and spirituality are actually working hand in hand here. And we're going to talk about how that is showing itself in some recent discoveries. You may have heard about the gravitational wave signals that have been discovered, and you probably went, what does that mean? So what? Well, it's a big deal. It is a big deal, and we'll talk about that. But I also want to get to, before we get to Valentine's Day and all of this, the passing of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, which happened yesterday. Now, I've spoken, I think last week, I spoke about how, as spiritual beings, we, without really understanding that on the mundane level, on the highest level, while we're as we are creating everything in this world, we also create our own deaths, the circumstances around our deaths, and how we're going to leave this world or leave the world of holograms, and we do so in a way that is indicative of what we were doing, the things we were trying to say, and the ideas that were part of your physical in taking form in this mundane world. And I think the passing of Mr. Scalia is a perfect resonant, support of that. concept, because this one man's passing has uh, had a seismic uh, effect on the political landscape, on the presidential elections, on our understanding of our society and what we want to stand for as a country. Um, and the reason it's so powerful is because of uh, his conservatism uh, was something that had really powerfully moved the Supreme Court to being a more conservative Supreme Court. But more importantly, his idea of um, the Constitution not being a living document, not being a document that changes and evolves, as personally I believe the founding fathers intended it to be, but instead looking at the Constitution as a framework that was set into place, hasn't changed, can't be changed, shouldn't be changed in response to uh, the current uh, beliefs, the current needs of the country. Um, so he was a purist in that sense. And his passing throws into chaos all kinds of decisions that are before the Supreme Court right now. But not only that, it also, I think, reignites this debate about, is the Constitution, is the framework upon which we have built our country evolving? Should it evolve? Or is it written in stone? And it's interesting, I think it has a big parallel with beliefs about religion these days, the idea that these religious tomes, such as the Bible or the Quran or even the Bhagavad Gita, that these ancient manuscripts somehow shouldn't be, well, I don't know about updated, but shouldn't be should be followed as if we were living in the very times they were written in, and that results in a certain kind of fundamentalism on uh, the part of religions. And I believe that um, this response to the Constitution comes from a similar place. It comes from this place of fear of change, of fear of evolution, that the ancients knew so much that we should live as they lived, and not be responsive to our own changes and our own evolving. It, in fact, denies the idea that humans do evolve at all, or that life evolves and changes and progresses, and it basically says that life is pretty much the same as it was back in the 18th century or the 2nd century or whenever. So, it's an interesting set of circumstances, and it goes part and parcel in, I think, in our reevaluating this idea of, an evolving set of ideals. So that's all I wanted to say about his passing, and on the end of his life, and how that might have some spiritual meaning. So, okay, quickly now, let me get here to St. Valentine's Day, okay? Since it is Valentine's Day. And of course, a lot of people find Valentine's Day to be kind of just a silly uh, Hallmark greeting card um, kind of event, but actually, it does have its roots in ancient celebrations. It actually um, can be traced to something called the Feast of Lupercalia, which was a Roman festival that celebrated the goddess Juno, or in Greek terms, she was called Hera. She was married to Zeus, or uh, 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 in Roman terms, uh, my goodness, I can't remember what Zeus's Roman name was. But in any case, Juno was his wife, and she was considered the goddess of women and marriage. And this festival celebrated her, and a fertility festival. Um, so the fertility, giving birth, having children, uh, uh, and all of that. So it was that kind of celebration, and one of the customs was to bring together young boys and girls who otherwise, in the society that they were brought up in, they would be strictly separated. But they are brought together during this feast, and on the eve of the festival, names of young Roman girls were written on a slip of paper and placed into jars. And each young man drew out a girl's name from the jar and was paired with the girl for the duration of the festival. And sometimes that pairing lasted until the next year's celebration, and sometimes they would fall in love and later marry. And the custom fell out of favor eventually, especially as Christianity took over, and felt the idea that mates ought to be chosen by sight came into being, and so that's where the origins of it come from. And then you have Saint Valentine, who actually was a real person. He was a saint during the reign of Emperor Claudius II in Rome. And there are a couple of stories. No one seems to know exactly what uh, you know version is true, but many stories have been told about Saint Valentine. One is that Claudius was involved in some very bloody wars and wasn't able to get soldiers to join his armies because, and he felt because they didn't want to leave wives and families. So, in order to ensure that he had uh, a pool of men upon which to draw, to fight his wars, he canceled all marriages and engagements in Rome. And Saint Valentine was a priest who defied this order and secretly married many couples. And once his defiance was discovered, he was put to death on February the 14th, 27 AD. And then after his death, he was named a saint. So Valentine's Day is actually the day he was killed. Apparently, kind of puts a damper on that. But then there are other stories that he was killed because he was trying to help Christians escape from prison in Rome. And there's another story about how when he was in jail, he fell in love with the jailer's daughter, and before his death, wrote her a farewell letter signed "From Your Valentine," and that's where the idea of Valentine's came from. So a lot of interesting history there around Valentine's Day that you don't doesn't necessarily fit on a Hallmark card. Okay, so now I want to talk about our main topic here because we're coming close to the end of the show, and I got to get to this. So I've talked about how we discovered this planet Nine that scientists know is there because of its uh, because of the uh, reactions of things around it, even though we can't see it. Well, and how that many people think is heralding some very important changes in our world. Well, just this week, a theory that Einstein had put forward many, many years ago, but had never been truly proven until this week, has now come forward. This is the idea of gravitational waves. The idea of gravitational waves is that everything that has mass or matter moves and creates waves. And apparently, up until this point, it had not been able to be proved that gravitational waves existed, coming from any accelerating mass. But these ripples in the fabric of time and space have now been verified. And the reason it's important is because now, using these gravitational waves and being able to read them, we can know much more about things like black holes, which we can't see using telescopes. But through gravitational waves, signals that come right from these objects and carries information about them, we can basically have a direct detection of black holes and dark matter. And we've talked about dark matter on this show. Most of our universe is made up of matter we don't know anything about and that we can't see. These gravitational waves will now help us to know much more about what we never knew. So, and I'm going to read this because I really like this this little snippet from this article that's posted at bbc.com in their science section about what all this means and what it could lead to. And so it reads, it's easy to speculate that the biggest revelations will come in areas where we didn't even know what the question was, the unknown unknowns. That's always been the case when new observational techniques become available. But, well, for now, on the theory of gravity itself. Because as yet a quantized theory of gravity doesn't exist, and it's still a theory. And to get there, we will need to investigate places with extreme gravity, and that's where black holes come in, because black holes have such a powerful amount of gravity that it literally sucks anything into it that comes near it. So this ability now to detect these things and to detect dark matter and how it works will certainly reveal the unknown. And it's right in line with the discovery of this Planet 9 that I talked about, which is a planet that astronomers know is there, but can't definitely see. So it is a heralding of the unknown perhaps becoming known. So, what does this mean for science and spirituality, and how does it work together? As I said, science and spirituality, particularly with things of this nature, where you have gravity waves, the idea that what is real fluctuates. This goes along with quantum physics. The idea of what we see is not all that's there and is not really the reality of things. This is the essence of what mystics through the ages have always said. And so what I'm predicting and what I'm seeing in this transition era that we live in, as more and more science confirms spiritual ideas, that science and spirituality will not only support each other, they're going to become almost one and the same. And it will be interesting to see how religion fits into that. If, as we talked about with, uh, the idea of rigid interpretations of ancient scriptures that don't change and evolve with evolving knowledge, if that is the approach of religions, then what you will have is this science spirituality versus religion. If, however, churches become evolving, as science is evolving, as our understanding of things is evolving, then you will actually probably see uh, organized religions using these concepts that science is proven to help explain, you know, how the world works for in a spiritual way, how we might live our lives more fully. I mean, that's what churches are supposed to do. Unfortunately, fewer and fewer seem to do it, which is why many churches are people are leaving churches in all faiths, because there's an understanding, intuitive as it may be, that there's a lot more that's being missed. That there's growth, there's evolution that we are going through that is not being reflected in what is being talked about in many churches. So I think that's why a lot of people are leaving. So, all right, now I promised you, since it is Valentine's Day, a little bit about the heart. So, 4 things to stay away from to keep your heart healthy. One is trans fats. Now, these days, a lot of the culprits that had a lot of trans fat in them have taken the trans fat out. Snack foods and processed foods and things like that. So, look at the labels and you'll see whether or not what the levels of trans fat are, and try to limit those, and minimize your exposure to those. Animal protein. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to stop eating meat altogether. That's not necessary, not even probably good. But it's just that excessive animal protein. I mean, eating tons of meat can put a strain on the heart and contribute to heart disease. Carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, kind of stuff you find in cookies and soft breads and chips and sodas. So they can increase your triglyceride level and your lower your healthy cholesterol, and that puts your heart at risk. So those are things to stay away from. And sodium, too much sodium, excessive sodium. I recently started looking at the soups that I was eating for lunch to see how much sodium they have, and it's amazing that many of these canned soups have basically in one serving 50% of 40 to 50% of your recommended daily intake of sodium. And if you happen to eat more than just the one serving, well, you've pretty much already taken in all of your sodium for that day, and of course you're going to have more sodium in other meals. So it really is very interesting. Now, a lot of soups now are doing heart healthy things and reducing the amount of sodium, so you can look for the labels on that. Interestingly enough, I thought, well, maybe then these fresh made soups in the supermarkets that they make on premises, that probably would have less sodium. No, it has even more sodium than the canned. So stay far away from those. You're better off with the canned and just look for the heart healthy signs and read the labels, because that's going to have the least amount of sodium for you. If you try to, those store-made soups, oh, they are loaded with sodium. So we should stay away from those. So those are things that we can do to keep our hearts healthy and pumping and beating until next Valentine's Day. And so until next week, then it is time for me to head on out. Have a wonderful Valentine's Day. And keep your heart healthy.